Hello, book people. PT Hilton here with week 4 of the Dream Read Along. This time we will be discussing the fourth story arc of Sandman, which is called Season of Mists. This is a story arc that, in some ways, it's almost like Neil Gaiman. It is Neil Gaimaniest, if that makes any sense. This story is, in a lot of ways, like it's. If you think about it, by the way, there's going to be spoilers in this. The plot is pretty dead simple. Dream realizes he wants to save his old girlfriend from hell. He goes there, and Lucifer gives him the key to hell. And then a bunch of people are like, "Hey, give me hell," and he ends up deciding who to give it to. That's like kind of the whole story, the whole 8 issues. But while the story is interesting, like I think Gaiman here is a lot more interested in the ideas and clever, like defying our expectations in clever ways, and coming up with like just really big ideas and character moments more so than like a story. There's a lot of issues of this that focus on just like here's all these weird different pantheon of gods and different other things that are coming to Sandman's castle. So he's like interested in presenting all these different ideas a little bit more than I think we've seen in previous volumes and more than in future volumes, except for a couple of maybe of the short one like standalone stories that we'll see. I think this is Gaiman. It is Gaimaniest. So to me, this story is all about agency. It's all about like how much freedom do we have, and how do we use that freedom. So we'll see the characters making choices, deciding to walk away from bad situations that they're not happy in. Other characters who are deciding not to use their agency or maybe don't have any agency. And that's kind of what we'll see happening over and over again in this. So it starts with a very interesting issue. My favorite issue of this collection is probably that first issue, which is kind of the family dinner of the Endless. Starts out, of course, with Destiny in his garden, and I think we've seen Destiny before, but just very briefly. But we see him with his book, and he's a great example of a character who is not, maybe either doesn't have any agency or at least is not using any. He does what it says in his book because that's what it says in his book, and it says that in his book because he's going to do it. It's a weird, destiny kind of relationship. So it starts out with him reading, talking to the three witches, the Triumvirate or whatever they're called, and I think they've shown up in every collection too. Very interesting characters. But he finds out that he needs to have a family dinner, so he calls together all the Endless. And it's the first time we've seen all of them together in the same place. It's also our first look at Delirium, who is previously Delight, we learn, which kind of raises some interesting questions because, obviously the idea of Delight still exists and the idea of Delirium presumably existed before she was Delirium. So, why are these manifestations here? There's not one to represent everything. So why are they what they are? We also find out that there is a missing one, the Prodigal, who has abandoned his station. Interesting note here, the Endless don't really have names. All the names that we see for Dream, Morpheus, Lord Shaper, all that kind of stuff, we see other people calling him, but his own family just calls him Dream. And so they don't really have names, they have title or functions. They have like functions. So the one who abandoned his function, they don't really know what to call him. They just call him the Prodigal because he doesn't have a function anymore. I think we'll learn more about him down the road. But I think that family dinner was very interesting because just the way it all played out is fun to see them interacting with each other. The dialogue is great. Their interactions are great. And also, it's just really clever, I think, the way that they have that fight. Dream leaves, and then Destiny's like, well, that was the point of the meeting, so you can all go now. I just thought that was great. So Dream, again, we get to see his kind of inhumanity, and that he's like shocked when Death points out that he was wrong to condemn his old girlfriend Nada to hell. But he decides he's going to gear up and go there. So the second issue in this arc was actually not supposed to exist. It was supposed to go straight from that family meeting to him going to hell. But what happened is in a different DC comic that month, there was a different comic that had to do with hell. The comic was called The Demon, and the issue took place in hell, and there was different stuff going on in hell. So the editor told Neil Gaiman he could not have Sandman go to hell that month. He had to do it the next month. And Neil Gaiman said that was the only big fight he and his editor ever got in, because he was like, it's crazy. No one who's reading that comic is going to read this comic, and no one cares that it has to be continuity. And finally his editor said, I'm the editor of this book, damn it, you're not doing it. So that's what happened. And there's actually some references to that in the issue where he does go to hell. They talk about how there's been a lot of political upheavals here lately, which is that other comic. But anyway, what we get in that kind of fill-in issue he put between them is actually a really great issue. It's Sandman kind of going around and saying his goodbyes, and he goes to Hob and says his goodbye to Hob in a dream, which I thought was a very, very kind of moving scene. Dream with his only friend. That's the only human that we see him go to, other than the one we'll talk about in a second. But it's kind of interesting, and I wonder if Dream just takes a long time to develop friendships, and since most humans don't live for 300, 400 years, he hasn't become friends with any of the other ones because he's slow to make friendships. I'm kind of like that too. It takes me a while to become friends with someone. I have a lot of lifelong friends, but not a lot of like short-term friends. It takes me a while to get a good friendship going, much like Dream. The other thing we see him do is we see him go to that baby who gestated in the dream and name him Daniel. It's pretty interesting that Morpheus named that baby. Kind of cool. So then he goes to hell, and we have Neil Gaiman defying our expectations. They have it set up that it's going to be this big battle, and of course, Lucifer says, no, I've decided to just step down. And that's really where kind of the whole theme starts coming in of, you make your own hell. These people, kind of the idea is that these people wanted to be punished for all this time, or kind of chose to be punished. They didn't realize they could just stop being punished. And Lucifer is using his agency to just quit what he's doing and leave. I think this whole thing of like how much freedom do we really have, or not knowing how much freedom we have, is a really interesting concept, and not just in an afterlife kind of way, but how many times in our lives are we in terrible situations where we're like, I don't know what to do about this, and the answer a lot of times is walk away, or get yourself out of that bad situation. But a lot of times we don't do that, or don't think to do that. Another issue that's worth talking about is the one at the boarding school. That's kind of a bunch of when everyone's kicked out of hell, a lot of the dead come back to life, and it's the story of this ghost and this live boy in a boarding school, and it's kind of a microcosm for the whole thing. So they have all this terrible stuff going on. The live boy ends up dying, and then there are two ghosts, and then the live boy says, well, why don't we just leave this bad situation? And they end up doing so. By the way, those two characters, the Dead Boy detectives, end up having their own comic book and appearing in a number. They were in books of magic and some others, but I know they had their own at least miniseries, the Dead Boy Detectives. I'm not sure if it was an ongoing or not. So then the next really interesting thing that happens is all the different people who want hell coming to Dream to talk to Morpheus, who now is the key to hell and is the owner of the empty hell. We get to see Neil Gaiman's great interpretation of the Thor and Odin and Loki characters, which he said he got a lot of flack from comic book fans who thought he was trying to just make fun of the Marvel versions of those characters. But he said he also got a lot of letters from academics and people in Norway and Finland and Denmark and stuff saying, hey, thanks for making such an accurate representation of the Norse mythology, because he really tried to make it accurate to what the mythology was all about. Another great scene is when basically all the people who are visiting him, all the different gods and all of that stuff, say that they want to talk to him in private, and he starts having audiences one by one of them. One really interesting thing in that section is if you look at the art, it's kind of subtle, but you can tell that Dream looks a little bit different depending on who he's talking to. He always looks a little bit more like when he's talking to Bast, the Egyptian cat goddess. He looks a little bit more cat-like and things like that. So he always reflects a little bit of who he's talking to, which is really cool. Finally, he gives the key to some angels, and basically things are going to go back to the way they were in hell. But then another neat scene is his kind of dinner with Nada. One interesting thing to note about that is, if you remember in the story that we heard, the Tales of the Sand, or Tales in the Sand, or whatever, when we heard about their initial relationship, there's that layout of the panels, and then the long panel at the beginning, which was like the storytellers. That layout is echoed here during their dinner, which is kind of cool, I thought. One other thing that's interesting in this is that when they're talking, Morpheus says, I asked you before to be with me forever, and you said no. And she said, well, I asked you to give up your station and come be with me, and you said no, which is very interesting because we didn't see that in the story that we heard, the issue that we read. But remember, the issue we read was the men's story, the story that the men tell each other, and there's apparently also one that the women tell each other. So apparently, for some reason, that was left out of the men's version. And finally, the final interesting thing is we kind of just see Lucifer hanging out on a beach, enjoying his retirement or whatever. He's used his agency and decided he doesn't want to be the Lord of Hell anymore, and he's just hanging out on a beach. And then we see what hell's like now, which is kind of the same thing, but the new angels are ruling it, and they think it's for a noble purpose that they're punishing these people, which, as one of the people who's being punished says, that makes it even worse. All in all, Season of Mists is, I know for a lot of people, it's one of their favorite storylines. For me, I liked it a lot. Of the ones we've read so far, The Doll's House is probably still above this to me, but I do think it is Neil Gaiman showing some of what he does best, which is big ideas, the ability to defy our expectations, combining all kinds of different mythologies together. So a very good collection. Next week, we're going to be looking at Game of You, which is, in many readers' opinions, the worst Sandman collection, but Neil Gaiman believes it to be the best. So we'll read it and see what you think and what I think. Also, just a logistical note, if you're reading the trades, you're fine. You can just continue on. But if you're reading this in the omnibus or absolute or single issues, we're skipping a couple issues. There's a couple standalone story issues that we'll pick back up when we read Fables and Reflections in a couple weeks. Those are collected with some other short stories that happen a bit later. So next week, Game of You. I'm really interested to see what you thought of this one because there's so many interesting big ideas and interesting characters, and just a overall fun collection. I want to hear what you think in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching. I'll talk to you next time. Bye.